Massive thank you as always to our top tier patrons, Sarah Turner and Justin Harper. The podcast takes a considerable amount of work, so we really do appreciate everyone's contribution. You can support us too at patreon.com. It's not just in your head. Perks include access to our Discord server where we regularly discuss all kinds of things and access to our monthly reading groups. Alternatively, please do follow us on social media or rate us on Apple Podcasts and help spread the word. And this week's random call out goes to patron Tom Chatfield.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
We can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
Hello, today we are going to discuss hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And Liam just pointed out there's a big difference between hypnosis and hypnotherapy. What most people see as hypnosis is a kind of showman's trick where your eyes go in concentric circles and you transform yourself into a chicken. That's not what we're talking about. When we talk about hypnotherapy, we talk about the kind of hypnosis written about in the Association for Clinical Hypnotherapy called ASH, which has its own publication, or the kind of hypnosis that's discussed in the Mental Health Psychology newsletter or in the American Psychological Association publications. And there are different things that you can do. What I believe, according to the most important figure in American hypnosis, which is Milton Erickson, who has about a 15-volume set of his works. He died, but a fellow named Rossi wrote down everything. And they have an Ericksonian Hypnosis Institute in Arizona, headed by Jeffrey Zeig. And it's very similar to the hypnosis founded by Dan Brown in America. And what it is basically the empowerment of the client, knowing that somewhere that client knows what he, she, or they need and needs help finding it. And it's based, first of all, it's based on trust. I don't do hypnotherapy with somebody I haven't had a couple of sessions with, so they get to see I'm a decent person and I'm not going to turn them into a chicken. And then it's based on trust. And the state that one goes into is a similar state to what one is in when one is in a movie. So if you're in a movie and the movie is about undersea diving and you're totally into it and you feel you're there, you still know if somebody calls fire, you don't say, what do I worry? I'm underwater. No, you run for the exit because it's based on a psychological phenomenon called dissociation, where you can be two places at once. And every child is capable of that because it's the only way you can escape your parent or caregiver. You can seem acquiescent and space off somewhere else. And in madness, you don't come back. But every child has that capacity. And just about every adult has that capacity too. That's how we know on a job that we don't tell off the boss. Even if we're thinking, I see you kneeling to the floor, bleeding from every orifice. We seem as if we're listening because we can be two places at once. And so in hypnosis, first of all, you go down deeply into yourself. And in my form of hypnosis, which is based on Dan Brown's and Milton Erickson's, I always put a witness standing 5 or 10 feet away, looking with recognition and protectiveness, because part of every trauma is the aloneness. Even torture victims claim that the worst part is being alone. Mm-hmm. And so that I always have a witness there. And then when people leave the affairs of daily life and go down into themselves, they can find all sorts of resources that they didn't know that they knew, but which are there. And I find that hypnotherapy can be effective across a wide range of things, from managing pain and to psychological things, to helping people at the dentist. Some dentists use hypnotherapy or have a hypnotherapist there if people are allergic to Novocaine. And it's also based on connections. There's a marvelous article about how children in a cancer ward who needed chemotherapy had their initial chemotherapy treatments accompanied by a very strong tasting, unusual liquid. Then after a while, they stopped putting the chemicals in and just the liquid induced the changes because of the associations in the mind. Minds are very powerful. And I found that, first of all, a client walks into my office or does a Zoom or something. I use everything I can. I don't say I'm a hypnotherapist, therefore I am only using that modality. Like a carpenter, you don't just use a hammer. You have a whole bunch of tools. You take out the one that you think is needed and try it. And if it doesn't work, you take out another tool. So I've used hypnotherapy to help a guy who was sent in by his wife because he had a lot of rage. And when the baby cried, he would just say, "I'm going to kill it," which meant that she didn't want to leave him alone with the baby for obvious reasons. But she also wanted him to participate and not to have the whole burden herself. And when we went into hypnosis, he was the baby who wouldn't stop crying inside and needed to be soothed. And so we soothed the baby that was him. And then he actually began to love that baby and was able to be with her. And so, I found over and over again, people have inside somewhere the solution to their problems. Another person came in because she didn't want to die every day. And that was all. She didn't seem to mind that she was obese. I thought that would be something she'd want to deal with, but she didn't. She just didn't want to die. And when we went back to a time that was relevant, taking a train back and back at each stop to find a scene that had something to do with the problem, he went back and she went back, she went back to her schizophrenic father screaming and yelling at a neighbor so that she peed in her pants and was terrified. And then the father was institutionalized and he lived with his grandmother, who would say, "I hope your father's dead. I hope he's taking a train and he dies on the subway. I hope he has a 10-room house and dies in every room." And she'd say this to him over and over again because the father died, the mother had to go to work, and he spent time with his grandmother. And he felt identified with his father. And so we separated him out. We had him look at his father with compassion and know that he was him and his father was different and that was very sad, and be able to be kind to the father and wave goodbye. And he was okay then. He didn't want to die anymore. And although I would have suggested other things like not being obese, when a client comes to see me, I try to give them what they need, not what I would think. So he was fine. There people come in for all sorts of things. A simple thing like an addiction to buying a bag of potato chips and eating it every day, or a pint of ice cream. And when we went back to a scene that had something to do with the potato chips and similarly the ice cream later, it turned out that every day after work, his father would bring him a bag of potato chips because he was too skinny, and the father felt it was okay as a special treat. And when the father died, he kept the father with him through these potato chips. And so in hypnosis, we worked out other ways to keep his father with him. We worked out how his memories kept him with him, how the things he had in common, which we went over, were part of his father's part of him. And so he didn't need the potato chips. That's how it works. It's permissive hypnosis. It allows the client to lead. And sometimes I have a protocol. I have a way of curing victims of violent rape that renders them dysfunctional in 3 sessions. I don't publish it because I don't want a slew of rape clients. That would be awful for me. But, the first session I get to know them, then we go back to the scene and empower them and do whatever they needed to do. And the third session, we do that again until they get their power back. And they always have a kind witness looking on, whoever they choose. And sometimes it's me because they don't have people in their lives. Sometimes it's a bird with wise eyes in one woman's case. It can be anything, looking with recognition of you, because most people's trauma happens when they are totally alone. So I think that's enough of the opening bit, and I would welcome your questions.
Do you wanna shoot, Ikoi, or?
Sure. One of the repeated, because, I also asked a lot of people what their impression of hypnosis and hypnotherapy was. And while people didn't have a question, right, they often did mention suggestibility as a huge part of what they thought about hypnosis, that hypnosis is about, being suggestible and being in a suggestible and vulnerable state where you can be vulnerable to positive inputs, which induce behavior change. And that's how a lot of people seem to understand, this class of, I guess, treatment and therapy. And what you're explaining is a little more, in depth and different. So can you kind of, talk about whether, the whole concept of suggestibility is a misconception?
No, it's a different way of doing it from the way I do.
Okay.
Look, it's a major way that they say that major thinkers, and this is covered in the mental health psychology article, Is Hypnosis Real? They say first it's induction, helping you get to a relaxed state in which you're away from the affairs of daily life, and then suggestion. I don't believe in the suggestion part, even though very famous people like the placebo studies at Harvard Medical School believe in this. And then at Stanford, they have an whole institute that believes in this. I think that people can make their own scenes. And all I suggest is different ways of exploring those scenes. So, as I was saying to Liam before, I had a client who was very tough, and he was the child of a rigid, Orthodox, fundamentalist Protestant minister. And if any weakness came up, he'd say, suck it up, suck it up. And he came in one day carrying a big blue blanket. And I thought, whoa, blankie, I wonder what we're going to talk about today, because he was such a tough guy. And we went into hypnosis, because by that time, he trusted me. And we created a scene that has something to do with his problem without even defining the problem. Because his problem was that he was so frightened and so rigid, and we never put our finger on that he wouldn't have accepted that he was frightened. And so he went up to an attic, and I was there as a witness because he didn't trust other people. And I said, well, let's see what's in the attic. That kind of suggestion I make, not telling him what's there, but saying, let's look around. And he said, I can't walk across the attic. I said, well, what's in the way? And he said, it's a vacuum cleaner bag. And I said, well, let's go over to that vacuum cleaner bag. I'm right behind you, about 5 feet away, and let's look in and see what's in there. And so he did, and he looked in and he said, it's my stomach. It's full of my father's semen. And he started vomiting. And so I got a pail and I put my hand on his back. And that was a guarding against the pain of being sexually abused by his rigidly religious and proper seeming father. And once that was out of the way, he was able to sort of understand how vulnerable he was as a child and how he needed help and support. And he just couldn't suck it up anymore and keep it inside. He needed to have it out in this office, which is a safe place. But that was him. That was from him, about him. And it really helped. It really helped a lot. I don't believe that you can have these mass hypnosis, smoking cessation auditoriums with some person that supposedly hypnotizes you and gets you to stop smoking. Although they have about 20% success with that, then it goes if people then resume. Because it needs to be tailored to the person.
Right. It needs
Finding
to
their
be
solution. Yes.
individualized, because the reason that people do any specific behavior varies.
Yes, that's a wonderful point. That its meaning, okay, its meaning to you is one thing. What it is, we bring meaning to what's out there. And our meaning and what's out there are together like the railroad tracks, two asymptotic lines or two lines of a railroad track that seem to converge in the distance, but they never really do, because we interpret what's out there through ourselves, and it changes to our meaning system. And that was clear to me. I'm not religious, but when my daughter was beginning school, the only not horribly snobby and wildly expensive private school there was in our neighborhood, because the public schools were really bad, was an Episcopal school that had a mandatory chapel. And I was a little worried that she had a chapel. And I said to her the first day, well, how did you like the chapel? And she said, Mom, she was 5, the man is gay. I said, how do you know he's gay? She said, he was wearing a dress and a necklace. Well, that's what it meant to her, because he had this black robe and a big cross. Actually, he was flamingly gay. But I did say to her, he is gay, honey, just keep it under your hat. But that's what it meant to her, because the week before we had been in New York in the Village, and there was a transvestite bake sale. And she noticed that the people serving looked a little strange. So she asked her brother, what about these people? Don't they look funny, Max? And he said to her, well, if you see a guy with a dress and a necklace and bracelets, he's gay. And gay is when they like their same sex. So, of course, that's what it meant to her. But for somebody who was brought up in that church, it would mean this is a holy person.
Right.
It's just a whole
different meaning.
Different set of meanings, exactly. And what you do in a hypnosis is you go back to the place where you created a meaning, which is terrifying often, but which is the best a child could do. But you go back with your grown-up self and understand that it's not the best you could do. You could do a lot better, and you find another way. But we're not even aware we make these decisions. And so, it seems so real. And sometimes the way you make a decision is sort of half conscious. I had a client who worked in a factory in New York, and he had just come back from Vietnam, and the person right behind him on the factory floor was Asian, and he thought that guy was going to kill him. And he was very nervous, and it was getting in the way of his doing his job. And so we went back to his experiences in Vietnam and how they were trying to protect their country just like he was when he initially enrolled, and how that was just a person. And when people are in different situations, they act differently. And then after a while, maybe 3 or 4 sessions, he lost his terror and was better able to function at work. And he ended up being friendly with that guy. But the set of meanings that he had developed was Asian man, predator, watch out. You know?
Yeah. It's like,
so you can change your mind.
Why do you think it works if it is or isn't suggestibility? Like, clearly there's obviously different schools for this kind of thing. And suggestibility might be one way of getting to this place.
Yeah, but I think it works because we're never of one mind. Part of you has one set of opinions, and the other part has another set of opinions. Like with the rape victims, part of them felt like they were immobilized and totally helpless. Another part knows they're not helpless. They can always do something about it. And in hypnosis, they get to do whatever they want. Now, sometimes it's to kill the rapist several times, both stab him and also run him over with a truck. Okay, whatever you need. But you know that you have resources. Whereas in the moment of terror, you don't know that. And it reminds you of the other minds you have, which can heal you. And minds that were crowded out by the fear. You know, we all can change our minds. I can see that, you know, because I think there's a Leonard Cohen song, everybody knows the war is over, everybody knows the good guys lost, and so on. Everybody bets with their fingers crossed. Everybody in America knows this is a failing state. And if I walk around and talk to people about how the empire is failing, we lost 4 wars, and the government has abandoned us and we're all lonely, I haven't met anybody, even a Trump supporter, who doesn't agree. In fact, Trump was appealing to those people. That everybody knows, but unless you feel empowered, you don't know that you have the strength. And you feel victimized and alone. And I think that's where hypnosis can really empower you.
Yeah, that it resonates in that it makes a lot of sense that, and it's comforting to know that the solutions to some of your problems are internal.
Yes.
It's an inside job, so to speak, that you do have the tools, but maybe you just haven't sort of completely figured out how to use them.
That's right.
I guess it's clearly a hugely powerful process. I'm wondering on just sort of stepping out the sort of therapy thing, like from an evolutionary perspective, what is this attached to? Like, what was the because to some degree what you're saying is that people come to you with distress and they had these survival tools that were working and now they're not. And so now they need another way to navigate the world. And so from an evolutionary sort of perspective, I assume it is a self-correcting, the reason it's there is for exactly that reason, right? Like it's self-correcting. It allows you to keep surviving without
Right.
either killing yourself or other people? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is.
Well, I think every culture has some witch doctor or sage or someone that when people are very upset and out of their minds, does processes that are kind of placebos that show people other people care and that they're protected without specifically dealing with what the trauma was. They can drive it away. And I imagine healing circles are like that. And burning sage and having the medicine man of your village or of your settlement, like the Native Americans did, do stuff around you that is supposed to drive out the evil spirits. And if you believe they have that power, then you believe you do have help and there is something outside. And so it can help. I think every culture has this. They have some way.
Even Christianity has their exorcisms.
Absolutely.
Right?
They do.
You know, yeah, there's generally some, every culture has some kind of ritual associated with casting out evil.
Yes. And with getting rid of bad things with the help of a group that is supportive of you. Now, it's not as precise as hypnotherapy, which really helps. And sometimes, sometimes it's a simple thing. I remember a guy came to me who was 28 and he'd never had sex. And he was worried about it and frightened of it. And when we went back in time to a scene that had something to do with it, he had this scene of meeting a girl at a party and going out and walking outside with her. And she offered to give him a blowjob, but she was biting, raking his penis with her teeth. And when he made these agonized screams, she was interpreting them as ecstasy. And he didn't have the courage to tell her, no, stop. He thought that was what sex was like. And so we brought a knowing person there with him to tell him he can say, no, this is not what I want. I want to feel good, and I can. And that really helped him. It was a, simple association that he had that he wasn't aware of.
So I have a quick question. So the state that people are in under hypnotherapy, is that the same state as like, people under hypnosis, or is it different?
It's the same because in both
cases, so the state is the same. Okay.
The state is the same, only in permissive hypnosis, which is what I practice, and the Ericksonian and Dan Brown and so on type of hypnosis, that there's a trusted person there and that you are in charge. Nobody's telling you you have to do something or you ought to do something. And one of the big critiques that came up of hypnosis in the 1990s was that people were remembering that they were sexually abused when they were under hypnosis. And a group formed called the False Memory Foundation. It was formed of a guy named Fraad and his wife, not my name, Fraad, please, F-R-E-Y-D or A-Y-D, got together a group of these very wealthy people and funded contesting hypnosis as creating false memories because they were accused of incest abuse by often numerous children in their families. And so they made it seem as if therapists suggested that. And people are more suggestible. That's why I don't believe you should suggest anything to people. I think you should take only where they go. But they blamed the hypnotherapists for doing this. And so there are laws in Canada and practice in the United States since the 1990s that you can't use hypnotic memory in a legal case. Also, all memory is subjective. All memory.
Right.
And
yeah, memory.
so,
Yeah, doesn't work like a photo recorder. Yeah.
Exactly. And there's a big study at Harvard by Dan Brown and several other hypnosis experts, and they come out after a huge volume of saying it's subjective. And therefore, it shouldn't be the basis of a lawsuit. Only hypnosis should not be the basis of a lawsuit. It's all subjective. But the subject has to change his, her, their mind. And therefore, it's very powerful and useful, even if not in a court of law. Because you're talking about an internal system that you need to change, not proof in a courtroom.
Right.
And you have to be very responsible. I'd never suggest anything to anyone with whom I do hypnotherapy, except you'll remember those things you're ready to remember. And those things for which you're not ready, you'll be ready soon. Because sometimes people can't afford to know. And sometimes they'll stop a hypnosis in the middle. I had a woman whose father was involved in the mafia. And every time we went into this room where there was a dead body, she couldn't continue. She just couldn't proceed with the hypnosis. She was too frightened. Because she'd been told there was a dangerous dog in there when she was a little girl, but there was no barking. So she found the key to that room where they had hidden it and opened it and saw this dead body in the room. A little later, they got rid of the dead body, but it was a very traumatic thing for her. And she couldn't face it then. She could later. It just came to her later. But she had to stop, and that's fine. You know, you stop when you're ready.
Mm-hmm. So, is there are there people that are resistant to hypnosis or hypnotherapy that isn't able to get into that state that you need?
Yes, there are some people who have decided that they're not going there and that they're too afraid. Now, some of them, if you say, even though you close your two eyes, there's a third eye on your forehead that's watching and protecting you, and you put a lot of protectors in, it doesn't do any good because they don't believe it. I've only had one client like that, but he was like that. He would not trust anybody.
Okay, so it's more of a trust issue, you think?
It is.
Okay, rather than like a personality trait per se, because that was another question that came up a lot, is there a certain personality trait that enable, a more successful outcome?
I think it's an openness to it and a trust. Children are much more easily hypnotizable, which is why in operations and things and at the dentist, you can take the pain away because you can, if you can't use a drill or don't want to, because children can go into an altered state much more easily.
Because I believe for hypnosis is used for spinal tap.
Yes, it's used for it's all sorts of pain. It's used for pain management, relaxation. They found that people who were going into operations, if they had relaxation therapy beforehand through hypnotherapy, they had less pain. It can take away the acuteness of pain, and it can make recovery easier from surgery, and that's been studied quite widely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was surprised to find that a specific type of hypnotherapy is used for irritable bowel syndrome.
That's right, because that's a psychological thing. And you can go in.
Yeah, there's a psychological element too.
Yes.
At least, some of the, just being able to take, edge off any kind of discomfort, whether that's from recovering from surgery or whether that's, a chronic condition is obviously a very helpful thing.
Very helpful, because there's a somatic body compliance with a psychological need, as well as a psychological compliance with a somatic issue. But you can interrupt the meaning system. So it's not, oh my God, I'm under the knife, I'm going to be killed. That meaning system, that I'm safe, I have it within me to heal, I can be relaxed, is a very different attitude, and much, much more relaxed, and therefore much more compatible with recovery.
Right. Right. So you would say, like, all the hypnosis tapes and videos are kind of, would you say that, like, they're mostly useless?
They're mostly, charlatan. They're mostly a hype and crap and showmanship, and not therapeutic.
So it's not, you would say, like, it's not those, like, because those hypnosis tapes would kind of go into the realm of, I guess, self-help, right?
It would, and some of them might be useful, and some of them might be just a ripoff.
Is there like a way to tell which one is a ripoff and which one might be useful, aside from, like, the individual using it?
Well, you can look at the names and whether it's something put out by the Ericksonian Foundation or the Association for the American Society for Clinical Hypnosis, that those are more reputable organizations, and therefore they would not have these real crappy fundraising tapes.
Okay.
Those are two sources that would be trustworthy.
Can you, like, describe the Ericksonian method in, like, a nutshell, and how that differs?
Yeah, the Ericksonian method is also based on permissive hypnosis, and they have various techniques. One is a confusion technique, where people expect you to say or do something, and then you do something else and immediately give a suggestion. So there's an example in Erickson's work where he's shaking someone's hand, but then he lifts the hand over the head and says something like, you'll have more confidence. And in that moment of confusion, people hold on to something that they can believe in. So there are different techniques, but basically it's permissive hypnosis. And Erickson figured this out because when he was a kid, I guess he was about a young teenager, he hit a rock when he dove into a little lake, and he was paralyzed from the neck down. And he heard his mother talking to the doctor, who said he will die because he'll never be able to move his body. And as he did that, as he listened, he found he was rocking in the chair, so he was moving. And what he did was he based himself on his new baby brother and learned his movements over from scratch, from lifting his head and turning like his baby brother did. He retaught himself and believed that he could regain his motor facility, which he did. I mean, he was never an athlete or anything, but he could walk around, and he could live. And he figured out this method of going back and reconstructing, and then went back and reconstructed emotional scenes as well, and physical scenes. And he has a huge body of work that develops his method, plus a foundation in Arizona, the Ericksonian Foundation, headed by Jeffrey Zeig, which has workshops and tapes and books and everything. But, it's a powerful tool.
Yeah, it is powerful, and it strikes me that it can obviously, because it's powerful, it can be really dangerous as well.
It can be misused like every other powerful tool.
Yeah, but what's interesting is, and this has definitely reframed it for me, is the idea that it's ultimately based around trust.
Yes.
And then suddenly everything sort of clicks into place, right? In exactly the same way that, I don't know, if you're bringing up a kid, there has to be that can either be a positive experience for the kid, or it can't. And so, just in the same way that a parent can abuse a trust, so can a hypnotist or a therapist or whatever. And that that's the rub right there. It's ultimately, if you want to sort of be vulnerable, you have to trust that the person you're with has your best interests at heart.
Yes, and you have to be careful.
And there's obviously a lot of examples of either bad guardians or bad sort of sketchy hypnotists, I guess, as well.
Right.
So it's all they all go hand in hand.
Yes, they do. It's a capitalist society. So if people can find a way to rip you off, chances are many people will. And you have to find sources that are honest.
Right.
Yeah, well, I think there's also another thing, which is this, in reading about it initially, this idea of suggestibility. It struck me, this idea of, hypnosis seemed like this sort of spooky woo-woo thing where it's like, there's this bad wizard could, put you under a spell. But it's like, it assumes that we're not suggestible in our sort of day-to-day life, like somehow hypnosis is this super suggestible state. And it's like, well, there's a reason TV ads are on, or there's adverts before a YouTube video. It's like, because clearly we are sort of suggestible by nature. We can be persuaded to do things.
Right.
So the hypnosis thing suddenly doesn't seem so out there. It just seems like a sort of heightened arena for just focusing on you. So that's why I thought, the suggesting thing does make sense, but that it's based ultimately around that you trust this person.
Yes, and you look for permissive hypnosis that's empowering, gives you the power over pain. It gives you some power over fear. It gives you some power over things that held you in thrall since you were a child and created a meaning that was very scary, and looked at with your grown-up self are not so scary, because we all have a lot of selves. Some of us is a little frightened kid, and some of us is a very brave grown-up, and you can heal those parts. You can bring the grown-up to the little kid and help, which is what you do in therapy anyway. You help people sort through and bring their grown-up self and their kindness to the little frightened kid that they are. And it's very helpful.
Yeah, and I think the ethical component there, which was pleasant to hear, was the idea that you're not suggesting things.
No.
You're just sort of helping them figure it out for themselves, which is, sort of parenting or friendship, or, it's 101. That's the whole rub, isn't it? It's,
yes,
if you're speaking to a friend, you don't really necessarily want advice. You just want someone who's going to listen and, or, maybe point you sort of in a general direction.
That's right. And what the direction comes from is a client finds a scene that has something to do with his or her problem or their problem. And then from there, we explore. So I'll make a suggestion, like I did with that fellow. Let's see what's in that vacuum cleaner bag. We can approach it very slowly, and there I am right behind you. But that wasn't my idea. But you can help people get closer to their idea without planting another idea in their mind or telling them ever what to do. But at the end, you can say you will remember those things you're ready to remember, and those things for which you're not ready, you will be ready. Or you can say you will hold on to those things that you're ready for right now, and those things for which you're not ready, you will be ready later in your own time. What's most important is the empowerment. Then it's a liberation tool, like therapy can be, getting you into your own empowerment. And that happens over drugs. It happens over potato chips or ice cream or other compulsions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Ikoi, I don't know if you had a question, but just as a aside, I can cut this out or whatever, but it strikes me that, a big part of the discussions that have been had on this podcast, or more on the sort of political end, they are disempowering in many ways, because there is a sort of consciousness and an awareness of just things being sort of rigged against the individual or the family or a community or whatever. And so and sort of riffing off that article that we discussed in one of the reading groups about, you don't have a moral responsibility to be miserable. You do have some agency, right? Like, you're not like, yes, everything sucks, but just saying everything sucks and throwing your hands up in the air is just stasis, right? And I think that's, that probably gets lost sometimes in the podcast. And I think the idea that at the center of everything is some sense of empowerment, some sense of autonomy over.
Absolutely.
Right. That these are, various tools that is available to help people. And in that sense, it seems like hypnotherapy is a way to get people to relate better to their own selves.
Right, exactly. And to talk to the parts of themselves that are wounded and help them heal.
So, like, the one question that was asked was, can hypnotherapy be used to recall specific memories, even if they're not traumatic, that people don't remember, or does it not work that way?
It can work that way. It's very subjective. Everybody's different. And it can, I think, we know that our brains store. No, it's not guaranteed. And also, memory is subjective, so you don't know exactly what you're getting. I remember when I taught psychology at South Central College in State University in Connecticut, I walked in and I said, everyone close your eyes. What do you remember seeing when I walked in the room? One person remembered seeing, because I had kids and they gave up their Superman lunchbox and got a Muppets or whatever. So I had their leftover lunchboxes. One kid noticed that I had a Muppets lunchbox. Another person noticed I had pleats in my pants. I mean, they all noticed different things. They remembered different things.
Right.
So you don't, what you remember has as much to do with what's outside you as it does what's inside you, because you see the world through your eyes and through your set of meanings. And there's no getting around that.
Right. So, like, necessarily the a thing to remember is that, the memories that you access in hypnotherapy may not be exact.
Exactly. And the memories you access in anything may not be exact, because memory is not an exact science.
Right. Right. It's not like a recording device.
Yeah, I think it's Anais Nin who said, we see the world as we are, not necessarily the world as the world is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And so, I have a client who is a school teacher in a state which is really terrible in education. And she has a child who is paranoid. They have to put this child 10 feet away from everyone else's, because anyone who moves towards this child, he thinks is going to hurt him, and he jumps up to hurt the child. Because in his eyes, anyone moving towards him is a threat.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they just, they took the pencil sharpener away from his corner, they took the water away from his corner, because everything that he saw was threatening. Of course, that state doesn't have good facilities for children who need help.
Mm-hmm.
But, and it's all up to the parents, and the parents wouldn't cooperate and get the kid help. It was very clear in the very famous Ethan Crumbley case. He's the kid whose parents got him a semi-automatic for Christmas, gave it to him early, and refused to heed. The school called them in when he has a scene with bullets and blood, and blood everywhere, and it says, "Help me." So they called the parents in. They wanted him to leave school right away and get help within 24 hours. But the parents just walked out, and they could not legally compel the parents to do that. And he went to his locker, got his semi-automatic, and killed 6 students and wounded 5 other people at the school, a teacher and 5 other students. And the mother, noticing the gun was missing that morning, said, "I see the gun is missing. Don't do anything silly, LOL." Lots of laughs, right? So the way the parents saw it, giving an unhappy child a semi-automatic and thinking it's funny that he might shoot up his school is the way they saw it, thanks to the NRA in part. But the school saw it as a dire threat. It's so different from, that reality is so different and dangerous.
Right. Well, because, there's also like a very clear context here that, this child was troubled and asking for help.
Yeah, he wrote "help me" over all this blood on his picture, but his parents didn't think that was interesting. The school found it interesting within the history of school shootings all over the place.
Right.
But the parents didn't. And the mother was asking for lesser bond so she could get out of jail, because she and her husband were blamed. And so they hid in a warehouse in Detroit in the basement. But they're so stupid, they parked their car in front. So, of course, they found them. Or they had such an unconscious wish to be caught. I don't know. If you're on the lam, it's not best to leave your license out there, but whatever. And they're in jail. And so is the child.
Well, one, I guess, other question that I did have is, a couple of people have asked about self-hypnosis, that if that was possible.
It is. It is. You can learn the techniques and make it easier for yourself. If I go to the dentist, I always hypnotize myself. So I'm really on the ocean on waves with the sun shining in my face rather than having, the dentist drilling my teeth.
I have a bit of a phobia with
dentists.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is scary.
So this might be helpful for me to learn.
It might be. And it's helpful for a lot of pain management. And there's a lot of work on that. And the American Society for Clinical Hypnosis and the Ericksonians have a lot of literature about it. And it's used in a lot of different places to help people control pain. It's used in terms of childbirth to help control pain.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any links that you could send me, and I'll put them in the podcast notes about how to do self-hypnosis?
I'll look them up. I'll look them up because they would be links through the association, American Society of Clinical Hypnosis, or the Ericksonian links for self-hypnosis. And there are books in the Ericksonian collection for self-hypnosis.
Nice.
People who don't have much trust often need to be protected in this. And so they need someone to teach them who gives them a trustworthy guardian witness to help, so that then they can imagine that witness. And it's very powerful. I had a woman who called because she was a client in real trouble, and her face had fallen onto her chest. And she was terrified. And through hypnosis, we put, her face back on her head. And we soothed her. But if I had just said soothing things, it wouldn't have worked. She needed somebody outside to help her go deep and go there so she could come back.
Yeah, it's really interesting. On the NHS website, they say do not use hypnotherapy if you have psychosis or certain types of personality disorder, as it could make your condition worse. Which is, I think the NHS classify it as sort of an alternative, therapy. But they also state that thing that hypnosis does not work if you don't want to be hypnotized, which, another way of wording it is like, if you don't trust people, then, you're not going to open up. So it sort of makes sense.
Or if you don't trust your specific provider.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
Because it's also, one thing about probably one of the most, and this is not somebody that I know in depth personally. It was somebody that, I met at a bar just randomly and started having a conversation with. But, his experience of hypnotherapy was mainly through gay conversion therapy.
Whoa.
That he was more or less forced into.
Ouch.
And also he, and so this was probably one of the few times that I have talked to somebody who believes that through the course of gay conversion therapy, hypnosis, that was also, what made him accuse his gay relatives of sexual abuse that didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Well, that could have happened.
Right. So, he was a big, huge, if you can imagine, proponent of, potential false memory potential in hypnosis and hypnotherapy. But, it was also one of those things where if somebody has had such a very negative experience like him with hypnotherapy, do you think healing with the same modality would be advisable, or would you offer something else?
The only way that would work is if he really trusted you, because otherwise he's so identified, sort of falseness with hypnosis and also with conversion therapy, then it becomes kind of metonymic, and then it's like milk and coffee. Metonymy is the literary device where one thing is so commingled it stands for the other. Like you say, let's have a cup of coffee. You don't mean you be at your house and I'm at mine. We'll each have a cup of coffee. You mean you sit there and over hot liquid, you look at one another and you converse. Well, for him, the meaning of hypnotherapy was you make up lies in conversion therapy. That's pretty awful. So there'd have to be a different meaning system around therapy in order to do that.
How does trust enter into that situation? Because if you're being sort of forced or coerced to, change your sexuality in hypnosis, surely that person isn't trusting in that situation. No. Or are they like, oh yeah, there's something wrong with me, I need to not be gay, or like,
maybe they are.
The individual?
I think it's a combination.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of, this was an older gentleman. So this was something that happened, I believe. I didn't ask the exact age, but the impression was that this was something that happened during his teens.
Right.
That this was not like something that he, consented to independently as an adult.
And also, children aren't consulted about almost anything.
Right.
But they can,
especially these types of things. Right.
Exactly. Yes. That's an abusive therapy to begin with. But I remember when I worked at the Waterbury Family and Child Guidance Clinic, I had a little girl who had what's called trichotillomania. They pull out all their hair on their head, their eyebrows, their eyelashes, everything. And I've known people with that. Yeah. And she was about 8 years old, and she didn't want to come in the office. So even though my really awful supervisor told me I should drag her in the office, I wasn't so stupid that I followed his advice. So at her appointments, I would put little animals, little plastic animals in her hood or candies and things like that. And I would just sit there on the floor and play. And then eventually, took her maybe 4 or 5 times, she came, and just my listening to her and hearing her helped her, and she stopped her symptom because somebody respected her enough to wait for her to find what she needed. And what she needed was a bond with a trustworthy adult. And my stupidly coercive psychiatrist supervisor, who was the head of that clinic, he's dead, so I can say that, but he...
Did you kill him?
No. No, but every once in a while, I guess karma comes for you. But he had her brother, and her brother didn't get better. And my client did, even though I was a new therapist then. And he said, "Why do you think your client got better and mine didn't?" And I didn't tell him, "It's because you don't care about that little child. You showed him up several times and didn't even appear. I love that little girl and I respect her, and she needed love and respect." It's a big difference.
Right.
Of course, I said, I don't know. I could dissociate and be 2 places at once. It beats me, was my supervisor.
Well, I think ultimately a lot of, harms in therapy comes from the provider not having proper care for the client.
Not proper care, not proper boundaries. I have a hypnosis client now who said that she had tried hypnosis before, and on the one hand, it was helpful, but at the end, the therapist said to her, "I love you more than your mother did. She didn't love you."
Jeez.
Oh my God. Look, the woman was neglectful, but on the other hand, she had a terrible marriage, and it was the 50s, and she was in an awful situation, and she loved the kid as much as she could, because her little child self could say, "She doesn't love me, I'm all alone." But her grown-up self, looking back, could say, "No, she couldn't show me her love because she was so distracted by her own awful life." And you can't do that. You can't declare that to a client. That's really malpractice.
Yeah, that sounds inappropriate, and that just also is. That's a value judgment suggestibility, right? You're suggesting a specific value,
and also a client has to come to his, her, or their own conclusions. You don't decide; they do.
Right.
And so it's boundaryless and inappropriate because the whole point is to empower the client to the client's own judgments.
Right.
Not yours.
Right.
And in that way, it is permissive and empowering because of its basic respect. And I don't think it's respectful to have these mass gatherings with all sorts of magic to get you to stop smoking or something with no relationship with you or anything else except collecting your money.
Right.
Yeah, it's actually quite an industrial model of doing anything. It's very similar to the factory making the same product, and the idea that you could treat humans the same way.
That's right. And it's an abuse of their empowerment, because the point, at least for me and for those who share my values in therapy, is to empower the client to know that they have the healing power in themselves and that they can do it and that they need help, because we all do. But it's there. They know so much more than they ever knew they know. And that is empowering.
Just, I remember when I did the first, I guess, interview with you guys and you mentioning hypnotherapy. And I was like, there's so little idea of, because everyone's concept of hypnosis has a lot more to do with the industrial model.
Yes.
Of, lose weight, quit smoking.
Right.
and dealing with like very, very specific, like, pinpoint behavior change.
Right.
Right.
Also,
Versus like hypnotherapy, especially, is very curious. So I guess the only one other question I have is like, because you are also a psychoanalyst.
Yeah, I'm also a psychotherapist and mental health counselor.
Yes.
So what question is that?
So like, like I find the intersection of hypnotherapy and psychoanalysis really a curious one of how you think it complements each other.
Well, they both deal with helping people access unconscious decisions that they've made and value judgments that were the best they could do as children that are now dysfunctional and painful. And so that actually hypnosis is brief therapy because you zoom right in to the unconscious things that you believe, which you didn't know you knew, and then you find the solutions. And it takes longer in cognitive behavioral therapy or various other techniques. It takes longer to get there. And in both, you need trust.
Right.
And I don't think it's built on anything except training, but also caring, a caring guide, a fellow traveler to go back with you and figure out what happened and help you make a different decision. And hypnotherapy is not taught in most psych graduate schools.
No, it looks like an independent, separate pursuit.
It's too bad too. I know it's taught. There's an institute in Boston, Dan Brown's institute, which is also allied with Harvard, and so that their graduate students are taught hypnotherapy, but that's very unusual.
So, and would you say, are there any like specific, situations or conditions where you would recommend against hypnotherapy? Again, aside from like people who may have had such negative experiences with it, but are there any other reasons why you would not recommend hypnotherapy to people?
Well, I think if you were dealing with someone who really was psychotic, which means that they left social language and they were in their own personal language instead, they were that far gone, then it would be very hard. I couldn't imagine hypnotherapy, which is based on language, which has a lot to do with language. And when people have lost the social ability to connect, Lacan's definition of psychotic is when you are in your own language and you use language not as its social connector, but only in your own personal way. Then I don't know how you could do that. I just don't know how. It might be possible. I can't imagine it.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And what do you think of like the NHS recommendation against hypnosis for personality disorder?
Well, if they're psychotic, I wouldn't recommend it. And also, if they really can't trust anybody and wouldn't trust you, it won't work. I only had one client like that where it just wouldn't work because there's no way he would trust anybody. He came in for mistrust and it prevented him from trusting me either. So it wasn't a successful therapy. But with everyone else I've had, it worked. Although that one client had to stop at the corpse because she didn't want to understand that her father killed people.
Yeah. Yeah, and you've been misled by your guardian and you have an idea about who they are. And then
and
too much.
And they had said there was a dog in that room, and it was a dangerous dog, but she knew dogs bark, that it wasn't that, and was really traumatized by that sight of an obvious corpse.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, her father left the country.
So you would say that it's more trust, aside from psychotherapists, or somebody
trust of yourself to be able to remember and be safe, trust of the therapist to safely guide you. But in my long experience, that's pretty much there for everybody. And it's there in all children. Children are much more open to trust for their benefit and to their detriment, both. Anyway, I hope our listeners find this useful.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I loved the questions. And actually, I've been practicing hypnosis for a long time and never asked myself these questions. So it was really good to have them asked.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I just thought like this is one of those topics that, people have this vague idea about but, have this kind of, like I said, only kind of strongly have this association with the industrial type.
Right, which is really a ripoff, like most industrial type things.
Right.
Major ripoff. Okay, so thank you both very much.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah.
Massive thank you as always to our VIP patrons, Rebecca Johns, Sheena Bilmus, Alexander Lashley, Jennifer Cox, Seamus O'Connell, Alex Placito, and Bruce Rogers Vaughan.
If you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
And you can hear more from Harriet on her radio show called Interpersonal Update. It's on WBAI at 2:30 EST on Wednesday afternoons and in the WBAI archives.